Hello everyone, hope you're doing well today. So we were originally gonna film our intro and outro outside today, but it is just way too hot to be outside, so we're inside. So let me know in the chat what the weather is like wherever you are watching from. And speaking of the warmth of the sun, one of the warmest ministries that we have here at Grace Chapel is our Stephen Ministry. It's a part of our care ministry, so here's a little video about what they do.
I'm Jean Middleton, and I am semi-retired, work part-time as a professor teaching neuroscience.
I'm Sherry Yu. I work in the biotech industry. I had difficulties at my previous job and had been seeking counseling. And then suddenly I was laid off from that job. I felt like I was thrown into a dark valley and was so depressed and hopeless. And I came to Sunny. She prayed with me and said, how about receive care and support from a Stephen minister? And I said, yeah, that'd be great. And Jean came into my life as my minister.
I first heard of Stephen Ministry, at an announcement at church. We all go through difficult times, and sometimes it's just not appropriate or it's not possible or comfortable to unburden ourselves to family and friends and coworkers. And I thought, wow, what a great ministry this is. And I thought, if I could allow God to work through me, in order to help someone else have an easier time of it, then I was gonna give it a try.
Jean is so loving, kind, patient, and non-judgmental. She walked with me and listened to what I had to say, a lot. I unloaded a lot of, what I had experienced, my stress and all that. And she listened empathetically. And she also shared her own experience. And just from the very beginning, when we met and talked, I felt the presence of the Holy Spirit. It is at work.
It is a sacred privilege to be able to walk alongside someone in this way. And it's something Stephen ministers don't take lightly.
It's free, it's unconditional. When people face darkness, right, like I did, I really need that light of life to bring me out of the darkness. There is hope. There is a path forward. I just felt, I was not alone, right? Definitely not alone. I felt through Jean, God was, with me.
If you would like to learn more about our Stephen Ministry, you can go to grace.org/care. Ministries like Stephen Ministry are able to happen because of the gracious giving of many of you out there. If you'd like to continue to give or give for the first time, you can go to grace.org/give. Today, Pastor David Morreale, the campus pastor in Foxboro, will be continuing our sermon series titled Searched. But before we do that, let's take a moment to pause together and pray. God, we thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to worship you, to learn more about your amazing love. I pray that you may be able to speak into our hearts, that you would cause our hearts to live for you and to become more like you every single day. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
So we're shooting today at Revere Beach, which is a spot that I not really frequent, but when I need to get out and I need to just kind of think and stare into an abyss of not quite empty open space, this is where I come. And I find the spot with the least people because I am an introvert, and I stand in the water. Last time I was here, it was much colder actually, but it's because this is Massachusetts. It was definitely March, but it was cold. And yeah, this is a place I come for a little solace, a little peace, to rest my mind or to air out my thoughts. And so that's where we are. This song is called Made New. You're calling me over. You're pulling me close. With love you surround me, yeah. You give me hope, yeah, yeah. Whoa, you're taking me deeper. You're making me whole. With your grace you redeem me, yeah. You restore my soul. Now I'm made new because of you. Yeah, you hold my head up. You remind me who I am. You hold my head up. I'm alive in you. I am. I'm made new. I'm made new. You're making me stronger. You're healing my heart. With your hand you hold me, yeah. You set me apart. Now I'm made new because of you. Yeah, you hold my head up. You remind me who I am. You hold my head up. I'm alive in you. I am. You hold my head up. You remind me who I am. You hold my head up. I'm alive in you. I am. I'm made new. Oh, I'm made new. Oh, I'm made new. Oh, I'm made new. You are my salvation, and I won't fear no. And you're the strength of my heart, and I won't fear. 'Cause you hold my head up. You remind me who I am. Said you hold my head up. I'm alive in you. I am. Oh, you hold my head up. You remind me who I am. Said you hold my head up. I'm alive in you. I am. I'm made new. Oh, oh. I'm made new. Oh, oh. I'm made new. Oh, I'm made new.
I want to start today by asking everyone a question. Do you have abundant life?
And no matter how you answer that question, yes or no, how do you define it? What is abundant life? How do you know you do or don't have it? Is it defined by your circumstances? Meaning, do you have abundant life because you have shelter, you're not hungry, you can make ends meet? Or do you want more out of life? Is it defined by all the Instagram stories that you see with people filled their stories with pictures of travel and new experiences? Their social media is filled with the candid pictures of them and their children laughing because that's what parenting is really like. Or maybe it's the perfect recipe or having that perfect date night. Or maybe abundant life, it's not so much as circumstantial, it's more emotional. It's how the circumstances make you feel. You have abundant life because you have a generally happy disposition. Not that you're fake about it or anything, but you have a joyful life. And if your life is not like that, you don't have those circumstances, you don't have those positive emotions, is your life therefore not abundant? We're going through a series right now called Searched, and we're talking about the most Googled Bible passages. Professor Pat Benton has done an amazing job starting off our series talking about the top 2 most Googled verses, John 3:16 and Jeremiah 29:11. If you missed them, I really want to encourage you, go back and watch them because she did an amazing job bringing these verses to life for us in our context, in our day. In fact, I would even invite you to consider sharing those messages with someone because odds are they've already Googled those passages at some point in their life. Today, we're talking about the 3rd most popular searched verse, John 10:10. And it says this: "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly." By the time we end today, I hope that we have covered these 2 questions. What is abundant life? And how does Jesus give it to us? For those who don't know me, my name is David Morreale. I get to serve our Grace Chapel community as a campus pastor down in Foxboro. But because I don't normally preach from this context, I normally have a habit of telling a quick story about myself. I preach, to you guys here online about once or twice a year. So I try to tell a quick story so that you get a background of who I am. I'm not just the preacher, but I'm also the person. Today, though, I want to extend the story. I want to tell you a story about myself, about how I came to know Jesus. In our Christian circles, we call it our testimony. But if you don't know what that word means, or that word doesn't mean much to you, I want to tell you how I came to know Jesus, how he became real to me. And if I can put it into these words, I want to tell you my truth. So I wrote my testimony back in 2015 when I started working in ministry as a youth pastor in upstate New York. That's what you did back then. You wrote down your testimony, you wrote down your story, and you put it up on the website. So even though I wrote it in 2015, here's how it goes. This is how it starts. I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. Jesus said this to his listeners according to the good news as told by John, chapter 10, verse 10. And that is really what my testimony to the truth and love of Jesus is all about. Seeking and finding life and finding it abundantly in Jesus of Nazareth. It was not the works of a street preacher telling me who is or who is not going to hell. It was not the work of a political candidate telling me how to vote on a certain issue based on their views or convictions of God. It wasn't even the works of a well-meaning pastor preaching a powerful sermon. It was a story about life. Now, I know the story, so I'm not going to keep telling it to you word for word. And I'm also going to give you the abridged version today. So if you would like to read it or share the whole story, you can find it on our website, grace.org/thoughtfulfaith. But here's how the rest of the story goes. I grew up in upstate New York. I have 2 older brothers. I'm the youngest of 3. You probably could have guessed that. And other than my parents' divorce, I really didn't have much adversity in life. I grew up very comfortable, very privileged. I had lots of opportunities before me. I always knew where my food was coming from. I had new clothes every school year. And my 2 older brothers, they even let me win at some stuff some of the time. My dad, God bless him, he tried to raise us Catholic. I was baptized, went through my first communion, and I was confirmed through the Catholic Church. My mom, God bless her, she tried to raise us Presbyterian. What I noticed as a child, what they had in common, the Catholic Church and the Presbyterian Church, was that they were both incredibly boring. As a kid, it usually meant just getting up early on the weekend just to miss the first quarter of football. So as a child, it was pretty void of any meaning. In this weird paradox, as I grew up as a child and even as a teenager, I believed that God existed. I just wasn't sure he was real, if that makes any sense. Fast forward to my freshman year of college, and this is where my story is going to take a sad turn. One of my buddies from high school, his name is Greg. He had taken his own life. And I want to pause here to say something that has nothing to do with my sermon. If you or somebody you know is struggling with suicidal ideation, please talk to someone. We have pastors and counselors, a whole care ministry here at Grace that would want to talk with you. Grace.org/care is a great place to start that conversation. You are not a lost cause. You are not a burden. Start the conversation, please. But when I went home for Greg's funeral, I had also learned that one of our next door neighbors had also passed away. He was only 2 weeks old. He died of heart complications. So the first day were the calling hours for the infant who had no choice. He just couldn't live. And the next day was the funeral for Greg, who he had the choice, but he just couldn't live. And Greg, he was energetic, he was curious, he was a natural-born explorer and adventurer. He was into every kind of music, and when I say that, I don't just mean like the popular kind. No, I mean like he was into folk, jazz, heavy metal, you name it, hip hop, pop. He loved every kind of music. He was a writer. He was creative. He was the type of kid who would do anything once. You know what I mean? He had that sort of mentality. So I don't miss the tragic irony when I say that Greg was hungry for life. At his funeral, there was this moment where Greg's brother got up and read a story that Greg had wrote. It was one of those what we did with our summer vacation kind of stories. And it turns out that Greg and his family, they went on this family vacation to a tropical destination. And when they were there, one of the first days, Greg makes this kind of offhand comment to his brother saying, you know, off the resort, there's this beach I would love to go to. Greg's brother thought nothing of it, said, yeah, that'd be great. Life went on. Days went on. And one day, throughout the vacation, Greg goes missing. They turn the resort upside down looking for Greg. They are terrified that Greg went out for a swim and never came back. Hours and hours go by before Greg's brother finally remembers that comment that he had made. So they go to that off-resort beach, and sure enough, they find Greg up in a palm tree, sharing a coconut with a local. That was the end of the story. That's what he did with his summer vacation, and that story drew me in. I wanted to go climb a palm tree with a local in some tropical destination. And the magnitude of the moment in which I heard the story, Greg's funeral, the infant's death, I started asking the questions that many of us start to ask, these existential questions. Why am I here? What is life? What does it mean to live? What is the good life? How do I make the most out of the years that I have? What's the purpose to all of this? Is there more to life than what I am experiencing right now? So I knew after Greg's funeral, I wanted more. And because of my Catholic/Presbyterian background, thank you, Mom and Dad, I decided to look for answers to these questions in the Bible. And I did what I think anybody would do who wants to study the Bible. I transferred colleges and became a Bible major, right? That's what you did too? And I'll never forget my first day of Bible class. And this is not an exaggeration to make a sermon. No, first day, first lesson, the professor, how do you read scripture? That was it. That was the first question. And I was kind of a smart aleck. You know, I didn't have the same Christian upbringing that most of the students around me. So I raised my hand and I opened up my Bible and I just, I read it from left to right. The professor didn't think that was as funny as I thought it was. He also didn't call on me for the rest of the semester. Other students had more honest answers. They would say things like, I start in the beginning, or I start in the Gospel of John, or I read a study Bible, or I have these sorts of tools next to me, or this devotional with me, or something along those lines. Finally, the professor answers his own question. He says, I want to teach you to read with context, context, context. I thought like a real estate agent, he was just saying location, location, location. He was just making a point. But what he meant was historical context, cultural context, and literary context. So at this point, I want to take a step back from my story, my testimony, and I want to pivot to going through to the passage. We'll get back to my story as we wrap up at the end today, but let's dive in to the third most Googled verse by tackling its context, context, context. In the interest of saving time, I'm going to combine historical and cultural context. So, about 190 years prior to John 10:10, when Jesus is speaking these famous words, the Jews revolted against the then superpower of the world, the Greeks, and they won. When Greece was the world power, they repressed everything that made the Jews unique, especially their religious practices. And some Jews, the elite Jews, the leaders of their day, capitulated to the Greek way of life. So they neglected their leadership responsibilities and betrayed their own people. They even went as far as allowing the Greeks to use their temple for pagan worship, sacrificing pigs on the altar in the temple, which utterly desecrated the temple. So this led to what is known as the Maccabean Revolt, which is remembered as the festival of dedication, also known as Hanukkah, when they rededicated the temple after their victory. And wouldn't you know it, but the cultural moment Jesus is speaking into, it's Hanukkah. So when Jesus speaks these words to the Jewish leaders of his day, the Pharisees, who were ironically the heroes of the Maccabean Revolt, as the elites capitulated to the Greek way of life, the Pharisees were the religious leaders of the people. And sometimes hearing something happen, 190 years ago, it makes it sound like it's irrelevant. But did you know that in Concord, Massachusetts, they recently found 5 musket balls that they believe to have been fired during the infamous shot heard round the world. And that happened almost 250 years ago, and we still reenact those battles every year. All that to say, this revolt, the bad leadership and its victory, is still very much so on the people's minds. And similar to how the Greek leaders capitulated to the Greeks, the Pharisees, they've gone from being a symbol of hope during the Maccabean Revolt to becoming burdensome, corrupt, and hypocritical. The Pharisees lost the plot. And just like the Greeks, they are now leading God's people astray. And similar to how we reenact the shot heard around the world, or maybe how we read the story of Jesus' birth at Christmas, they read and still read from certain passages during Hanukkah. Ezekiel 34 is one of those passages. Now, Ezekiel was written during Israel's first exile, which was centuries before the Maccabean Revolt. So Hanukkah, though, it's not only a celebration of the victory, but a remembrance of the poor leadership that capitulated to the Greek way. So they read this passage to remember all eras of poor leadership that led to dire consequences. Ezekiel 34 says things like, "Thus says the Lord God, ah, you shepherds of Israel who have been feeding yourselves." Verse 4 says, "You have not strengthened the weak. You have not healed the sick. You have not bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strayed. You have not sought the lost, but with force and with harshness, you have ruled over them. So they were scattered because there was no shepherd." The leaders of Israel, they failed to tend to their flock. The shepherds are the leaders. So God makes a promise a few verses later. He promises things like being their shepherd, giving them green pastures and giving them rest. He says in verse 16, "I will seek the lost. I will bring back the strayed. I will bind up the injured, and I will strengthen the weak. But the fat and the strong I will destroy. I will feed them with justice." Understanding this historical and cultural context for any passage is crucial because it helps us get at the full meaning out of the Bible. Jesus did not speak into a vacuum. He spoke to a certain group of people at a particular place in a particular time, who held certain beliefs and had certain norms and taboos and their own baggage that is utterly different from ours. The literary context, our last context of today's verse, is actually a continuation of a teaching from a chapter ago. So real quick, John chapter 9 is the story of a blind man who receives sight. As the story goes on, the blind man who can now see is brought to the leaders, the shepherds of the Jews known as the Pharisees. And they didn't like that this blind man was healed on the Sabbath. And they didn't like that he was not willing to admit that the man who healed him, Jesus, was a sinner. So the Bible says that the Pharisees drove him out. The next verse, Jesus found him. The shepherd looking for a lost sheep, he found him. And eventually the man who can now see confesses Jesus as Lord, as Son of Man, and worships him. And then Jesus says that he came into the world for judgment, that the blind would see, and that those who can't see would become blind. The takeaway from the passage is that seeing is more about perceiving who Jesus is. It's not about eyesight. So this man, the miracle was not just receiving his eyesight. The miracle was that the man now knows who Jesus is. So to further develop his point that it's all about knowing him, Jesus begins talking in this metaphor, talking about sheep and a shepherd and a gate and some thieves and some bandits. So let's read John chapter 10. We're going to start in verse 1. We're going to go through verse 11. It says this, "Very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate but climbs in by another way is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name. He leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers." Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus said to them, "Very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved, and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." Verse 11, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." Let's break this down. In verse 3, Jesus talks about knowing their names and that they know him and they follow his voice. Now, part of the literary context in chapter 11, the chapter right after the verse we're studying today, Jesus stands at the tomb of his friend and he calls him out. He says, "Lazarus!" And a dead man walks out of his tomb, having recognized the voice of the shepherd who calls him. In verse 6, the author here, John, mentions that they don't understand the metaphor. The idea that he's reinforcing from the previous chapter, though they see, they are still blind because they don't know the voice of the one speaking. In verse 8, Jesus talks about being the gate or a door into the sheepfold. And he says that all who came before me are thieves and bandits. Now there's two ways that we can understand what Jesus is referring to. Does came before me mean in a temporal sense, meaning that all who came before Jesus, all the shepherds and leaders historically are thieves and bandits? Well, that would have to include David and Moses, or maybe even Abraham. And it could mean that, right? They all failed in one way or another, but would Jesus call them thieves and bandits? Or does he mean all who came before him as one stands in front of a door, spatially? To me, given the context, this makes more sense. Those who oppose him are those standing right in front of him, looking to exploit the sheep, the leaders, the shepherds, the Pharisees of Israel who would feed themselves and not the sheep, who would drive out the sheep. Which kind of answers the question for verse 10 of who are the thieves and the bandits? The thief comes to steal and kill and destroy. And many people will say that this is Satan. And I'm sure on some level, this can be true. Jesus can mean more than one thing at the same time. But the context points me to believe that Jesus is speaking directly to the Pharisees who would drive out the blind man, comparing them with the leaders during the Maccabean revolt who neglected the sick, the weak, the hungry, who would take their wool and feed themselves and who would drive out the weak sheep. On the other hand, Jesus says he has come that the sheep might have life and have it abundantly. Instead of taking from them, he's going to feed them in a pasture where they can all eat. Instead of taking their wool, he's going to nurture them. Instead of hurting them, he's going to keep them safe. Instead of ruling over them with harshness, he's going to guide them to lie down and to rest. Following Jesus does not result in having more than you need, but in everyone having enough. So in verse 11, Jesus is blatant that he is the fulfillment of God's promise from Ezekiel 34. He is the good shepherd who finds the lost and binds up the injured and strengthens the weak. And I think he had all of that in mind, but then he adds, and the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. So that's all the context we need. How do we answer our two questions then? So let's start with what is abundant life? And I think the key to answering this question is not found in the pastures and the water or the safety. And I'm afraid that this is many people's takeaway when they read this verse on its own and out of context. That abundant life is one of adventure or material excess or answered prayers or health and prosperity. I'm worried that some of us think that abundant life is found in our circumstances. And as much as I was drawn to the gospel by Greg's story, abundant life, it's not found up in palm trees sharing coconuts with locals. Abundant life is life with the good shepherd. How do we make the most of our years here? How do we live the good life? Is there more to life than just fill in the blank? It's knowing him and being known by him. Those who base their identity on being loved by Jesus often love like Jesus. This is abundant life. It's life with Jesus. It's hearing his voice and following him. And Grace Chapel, I've got good news. I've got good news for anyone who is hearing this. God is calling you. You, me? Yes, you. From whatever circumstance you might find yourself in. Why? Why would God call me? When I was a teenager, I thought Christianity was just a bunch of do's and don'ts, and there was a point in my life where I was exposed doing all of the don'ts. So if you're like me, you might be asking yourself, why would God call me out? I'm doing all of the wrong things. He's calling you because he cares. He cares that you are lost or scattered. He cares that you've been exploited and taken advantage of. He cares that you're sick, that you're injured. He cares that you're restless. He cares that you've been victimized by bad leadership. And he promises that anyone who enters will be saved. Anyone. He's even calling out to the Pharisees themselves. He is speaking to the thieves and the bandits that are right in front of him. The bad shepherd, as he will also describe them. To the overfed rams from Ezekiel's passage that push away the scrawny ones. He calls out to them to destroy them. But this isn't as punishment. In fact, he has come that no one shall perish, right? That's a callback from John 3:16. He will destroy them with justice. He will destroy the bandits and the thieves and turn them into sheep. Biblical justice is not punishment, but transformational. So if that's what abundant life is, how does Jesus do this? How does he give abundant life? How does he transform the thieves? The tragic irony is not lost on me when I say that he dies to give life. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Abundant life is life with the shepherd and following his voice. And if some of us ask, why would he call out to me? Others of us might ask, how can we hear him? How do we know it's his voice that calls us? Right? Maybe you're saying to yourself, I've never heard his voice, right? Audibly or experienced even an emotional or spiritual thing. You know he's calling out to you because of the cross. Just like seeing is not with eyes, hearing his voice is not with your ears. The voice of the shepherd is the cross. And here's what I mean, is that to have a voice is to say words. And even my 1-year-old who just squawks and makes grunts and screams, right? These are her words. She's using her voice to try to communicate. And Jesus is the Word of God. This book that I'm holding, it testifies to the Word. It says that it is a witness to the Word, but it is not the Word. It is Jesus himself who is the Word. And words, it's how we communicate. Jesus is the way that God communicates about himself. God's self-revelation is Jesus. So to be even more explicit, the author of the Gospel of John, he writes a letter that's a little bit later in your Bibles. 1 John, I highly suggest you go read it, and it says that God is love. The cross was his megaphone from the 1st century to the 21st century. It says, you are known, you are loved. The Good Shepherd has laid down his life for your sake. It's his voice whispering through the generations to follow him. And he didn't lay down his life to forgive you, but to prove to you that you are forgiven. To prove to you you are safe with him. That you can approach him whether your intentions are to follow him or to crucify him, but you can come to him. Therefore, your circumstances do not define your life. Therefore, your emotions, they can be positive or negative. The trick is how do we experiencing them with the Good Shepherd? You can lament, you can praise, you can have plenty, you can have little. Abundant life is not circumstantial or emotional, it's relational. If you want to feel alive, you must choose life. You can love life as a response to the way that life himself loves you. I want to say that again. You can choose life as a response. You can love life as a response to the way that life himself loves you. The Bible says that Jesus himself says about himself that he is the way, the truth, and the life, and he loves you. So let's wrap up today by finishing my story, and then we'll pray. So my story says this. With a foundation that had been built through my Catholic Presbyterian upbringing, I began to take my Bible seriously in a whole new way. Instead of taking it literally, I began to read it with my heart wide open. I saw a new way of living, a life consisting of loving deeply and radically. And ever since, I've noticed abundant life all around me. Its abundance is found in my everyday tasks, and my worship of God is found in the mundane, executed in love. Life's most abundant moments, they have not been found in my 4-month homestay in Uganda, even though that was an adventure of a lifetime. But it's by telling my wife every day that I love her. It was not found by hiking to the top of mountains in Colorado, but by making lessons plans for youth group and writing papers for college. Though I was turned to the gospel by a story of living life as an adventure, I've discovered that the abundance of life is what I was really searching for and yearning for. Loving is the most radical and life-giving thing that I can do. So in all of its beautiful expressions, love has driven and continues to motivate a lifestyle that death cannot sting and the grave cannot conquer. Jesus is victorious over death, and his love has transformed the heart of this repentant sinner. So now we are all called to choose a life of life or a life of death. Choose abundant life. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, give us the eyes to see you as the Good Shepherd. If we claim to see rightly in our hearts, I pray that you would blind us so that we may truly see you. Give us hearts that can hear your voice calling to us, hearts that are melted by your cross and transformed by your love. May we find abundant life in you. I pray, God, for those today who feel sick, wounded, lost, and hurt by those that they trusted. May they know the safety of being your sheep and belonging to you. May they hear your voice today afresh, follow you into the age to come. Would you give us grace, Lord, for the times we went searching for life in all the wrong places? You promised that you are the way, the truth, and the life. So we call to you to guide us on the way, to reveal to us the truth of your love and salvation, that we would all know the gift and goodness of abundant life with you. It's in the living and loving name of Jesus, our Lord and Good Shepherd. Amen.
Glorious, shout it out and glorious, make it louder. Jesus, we shout your name. Jesus, we make your praise. Glorious, you are glorious. Oh, 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 oh. God, you are glorious. My God, you reign forever and ever. How great your name. Your love remains forever and ever. You stay the same. So shout it out if you know he's good. Sing it out, for the Lord is good. Shout it out loud, you are glorious. Said glorious. Shout it out and glorious. Make it louder. Jesus, we shout your name. Jesus, we make your praise. Glorious, you are glorious. Oh, 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 oh. God, you are glorious. Say, my God, you reign forever and ever. How great your name. Your love remains forever and ever. You stay the same. So shout it out if you know he's good. Sing it out, for the Lord is good. Shout it out loud, you are glorious. Said glorious. Shout it out and glorious. Make it louder. Jesus, we shout your name. Jesus, we make your praise. Glorious. Said shine, Jesus, you shine for all the world to see. You are glorious. Said shine, Jesus, you shine for all the world to see. You are glorious. Said shine, Jesus, you shine for all the world to see. You are glorious. glorious. Shout it out and glorious. Make it louder, Jesus, we shout your name. Jesus, we make your praise glorious. You are glorious.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and go in peace.